Is Bitcoin about to break out? Let's discuss. So hey everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. Today I want to talk about Bitcoin and whether or not it's finally ready to break above this resistance that it keeps hitting right around the 38K level. So Bitcoin, of course, went on an impressive rally coming out of the lows here in September, but it really started slowing down, especially as it got up to this 38K region. It's put some wicks up above on the daily chart, but it hasn't been able to push through. So can we look at anything to tell us whether or not it's likely to get a big breakout to the upside or not? And so what I want to look at is what some of our models here at the channel are seeing. So this is our short-term upside downside potential indicator, or UDPI for short. It's a risk model. Higher levels mean high risk, lower levels mean low risk. And it's short-term in its focus. Days to weeks are the time frames that the moves play out that it's reactive to. And so if we look at what the short-term UDPI is showing us, we can see that actually there's a lot of symmetry with what we've seen in the earlier parts of this year. So really, with every single one of these big pushes up, you'll see a spike here on the short-term UDPI. And notably, that spike has been terminating at similar levels. We actually terminated this spike here at basically the same level as this first rally in the beginning of the year, going into February. And so what that suggests is that the move here was getting a bit exhausted. It was realizing a decent amount of its realistic upside potential in the short term. And then, well, just like in every other time, getting up above zero here has acted as a resistance. We've had to cool off. Now, price has grinded up a bit more since then. We're starting to see your short-term risk cool off. Now, there's two different signs of this, right? What the bad news from this perspective is if we look at the previous times it's done this, even though it's managed to go in and set in a new high relative to the peak in the short-term UDPI each time, we've seen a notable correction after each one. So the question is, will we do that again? Are we seeing this peak? We've now put in a new high relative to when that peak was. Are we now destined for a correction? Well, I'm not going to be dogmatic about that. The other way we can look at this data is just that short-term risk is cooling off, just like every single time in the past. We saw this resetting of short-term risk that then set the stage for that next move up later on. And so I think it doesn't really matter too much of whether or not we see a correction or not. Really, what I'm personally paying more attention to is, do we see short-term risk continue to cool off? Does it continue to set a course back to the downside? And especially if we get back down to these same levels, these -2, -3, same levels that we saw in these previous resets, then that would seem like a pretty reasonable place to expect a rebound back to the upside. Now, we don't have to get all the way back down there, of course. If we're going to go into a bigger, more explosive move to the upside, then you could see the short-term UDPI start sitting in higher lows. Like, for example, here in 2019, you'll notice throughout this, the UDPI putting in higher lows through here. Basically, risk did not need to reset as far each time to set the stage for the next move to the upside. And certainly that could happen again. But if we were to get down to the -2 to -3 level, then I would just see that as being a pretty nice value zone, most likely for Bitcoin. It's not financial advice. You make your own opinions, but that's one of the things that I'm looking at with the short-term UDPI. If you want to view these data live, by the way, you can do it at our website, polaritydigital.io. Link is in the description. Okay, so that's one thing that I'm looking at that's maybe giving a bit of a mixed story here. So it's possible that we're going to have a deeper correction, but risk is cooling off. And so right now, consolidation makes a lot of sense. Could see risk cool off a bit more. Let's look at a little bit more longer term data though to see what those are saying. So this is our long-term UDPI. So same idea as the short term, but it's reactive to moves that play out over months to multiple months, even years sometimes. So much longer in its time horizon. And one of the things that you'll notice on the long-term UDPI is that risk has really moved up. We're up above zero now, up at about 0.49 or so. What you'll notice about this is that when you get to this level, there's kind of two different things that can happen here, at least historically speaking, when we look at it. The one is that you're getting closer to a local top. So for example, here, 2017, local top, we had a correction. Again, here, had a local top, we had a correction. Same thing back here. Here, we didn't really have a very deep correction, more sideways consolidation, and then the bull market, so on and so forth. That's one possibility. The other possibility is just ripping right off to the upside, going off in a massive rally, something like 2019, where we were kind of mid-move when we're up at those levels. Same thing back here in 2013, and then of course in each of these big bull runs going into the actual market cycle tops. So I personally don't think that we're just going to be ripping off to new all-time highs right here. I know there are a lot of people who are saying that we are going to just do that immediately. A lot of people on X calling for new all-time highs within the year. Maybe, certainly possible, and I wouldn't be upset if that happens. I'd be cheering Bitcoin on if it decided to do that. I just think that personally it's probably more likely that to spend a bit more time down below prior all-time highs, assuming we are entering into a new bull market, before we can go and do that. And so this gives me a little bit of caution in kind of that medium to a bit longer term of where we stand right now, where it wouldn't be impossible for price to keep moving up. And in some ways, I wouldn't be shocked if Bitcoin did clear up above 38K and go retest some of these higher levels, maybe at the mid to upper 40Ks even would be possible. But what I would be personally more inclined to think is that if we did that, it might be something more like 2019, more like this intermediate move up here in 2013, maybe even something like this in this second bounce up here, going to what was technically the all-time high, but really this kind of more or less double top over here, where it might be a notable move to the upside. But in my opinion, it's probably not going to be the move that takes us up into the whatever the bull market top ends up being. Wouldn't complain if I'm wrong, but that's just one of the things I'm looking at. So really what I'd like to see is for long-term risk to cool off. And that could be the case with prices continuing to consolidate here. Maybe we have to correct. Maybe even we do grind a bit higher, but then we do a catch-up peak and this moves down. Could happen in a bunch of different ways. But I would like to see a reset like we've seen often in the past that can then set the stage for that nice move to the upside. So taking this as an example, some consolidation lets long-term risk cool off. That could then eventually set the stage for a longer move to the upside in the longer term. So that's one of the things that I'd like to see happen. And then the final data point that I'm going to point to that also makes me think that in the shorter term, we might still need to see some consolidation or correction is our trend confidence indicator, or TCI. So this is a model that's all about trend, as the name implies. And it's really trying to tell you how confident should we be in whatever the current trend is. And the general idea with the TCI is that if you're in, so I'll zoom out a little bit more, if you're in an uptrend, if you're in a macro uptrend here, but you see the TCI trending to the downside, that's a bad sign. That's a sign that you're getting to a point of exhaustion, especially like through here, and that a notable correction might follow. And that's exactly what we saw going into the summer of 2021. But then if the TCI starts trending to the upside, and especially if it's doing that even when price is moving down, that's an early warning that bullish price action might be soon to follow. And that's exactly what we saw over here. And we've seen that each of the times that we've gone into a rally this year. You'll notice TCI starting to trend up even before price does, and then price follows. TCI starts trending down, then we have a correction. TCI reverses the upside, price follows. Trend down on the TCI, price then comes down and corrects following later, so on and so forth. And then through here, building up ever since August of this year through October, notable trend up on the TCI as price was grinding sideways, and then boom into the current rally. But notably, look at what's been happening recently. The TCI has been trending down aggressively, while price continues to grind upward. And now this doesn't mean that I'm just saying that we have to go and have a deep correction like we've seen in these previous times this year, but it does give me some concern. And I really, at the very least, I'd like to see this downtrend on the TCI reverse to the upside before I think that another massive move is especially likely. Could happen regardless. It's not guaranteed that price will have to move down, but it's a sign that's not what you'd want to see. What I'd really like to see is the TCI moving up with price to think that we're just going to be catapulting to the upside. So again, I won't complain if this ends up being wrong, but it's just one of those things where I will not be surprised at all if Bitcoin needs to spend more time consolidating at current levels, or maybe even correcting before it can rip up to the upside. So to kind of sum this whole thing up then, it would not shock me in any way if Bitcoin eventually does go and retest this level up here at 48K. I think that would not surprise me at all, or generally somewhere in the 40K range. But given what I'm seeing across the data, with the long-term UDPI still being fairly overextended, with the TCI still not looking especially bullish, and then with the short-term UDPI still looking like it could have more to fall on its reset, it would not shock me if this breakout might take a little bit longer than some are calling for. Now, this could age horribly, as I've been saying, and we could tomorrow, or even today, break that resistance that's been forming here and clear off to those higher levels. Certainly possible, and that would be a new data point that the models would react to. But I just want to kind of put this out there with all the hype and with all the narratives and with everyone who gets really excited every time Bitcoin gets up there, that it wouldn't be shocking and even unreasonable for it to have to spend more time correcting. And it wouldn't even be bearish, in my opinion, for that to happen. One of the things that I've talked about on X before as being, maybe one possibility is if Bitcoin were to, for example, set a move down here and try to flip this 31K general range into support and then be able to move back to the upside from there. So these are just squiggles. I'm not making any predictions about timeline of how long it would take for that to play out, but just one possibility that could be there. And that wouldn't necessarily be bearish because it would actually have a lot of similarities with what we've seen in the past for Bitcoin. If we just go here and just put in some horizontal lines, you can look and just see how Bitcoin had resistance here at about the 25K range that turned into support, then went up to the upside as well. So it would not be surprising or really even that shocking if maybe we did the same thing for around the 31K range where we turned that former resistance into future support. So I think we'll know pretty soon which way the wind is blowing. I think if we get a convincing close above this 38K level, maybe up in the upper 38Ks to even 39Ks, then that might suggest that Bitcoin just is ready to go. It's ready to go up and test the 40Ks, maybe even up as high as 48K. And so that just might mean if that were to happen, that short-term risk has cooled off enough. And even with long-term risks still being relatively elevated and the TCI moving down, that Bitcoin decides to just shrug that off and move on up. Certainly is possible. But the good news is I think we'll know relatively soon. But if we don't do that, if we don't have that move up immediately, and we do come back down here, I would not see that as a bad thing. I think a lot of people would get very doom and gloom if we came back down here and saying, all right, that's it. The move's over, we're going back down, to 12K or whatever. I personally don't think that would be the case. I think what it might mean is that Bitcoin's just going back down, maybe trying to flip this former resistance into support, which then could just create some healthy market structure to move it on up. So obviously none of that's financial advice. You should make your own opinions, but those are some of the things I'm thinking right now about with Bitcoin. So if you want to view live data from our models and more, you can do so at our website, ParityDigital.io. And of course, if you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like and follow us on X. A lot of updates about our models and more over there.